In 1960, on the proving grounds of Kapustin Yar, there stood a machine that left soldiers speechless. 60 tons of steel, 4 tracks instead of 2. A hull shaped like a giant flying saucer, or, depending on who you asked, an iron mushroom that had pushed up through the ground. Some called it the Moonwalker. Others called it the Flying Saucer. Its official name was considerably less poetic. Object 279. This machine was built to survive a nuclear explosion and keep fighting. It could drive through terrain that stopped every other tank cold. Its armor was essentially impenetrable to anything in NATO's arsenal at the time. In theory, it was the perfect tank for the war everyone feared, but no one wanted to start. In practice, it was cancelled with a single stroke of a pen. How did it come to exist? Why was it killed? And why does the sole surviving example stand in a museum today as its unofficial symbol? The one exhibit no visitor walks past without stopping. To understand any of that, you need to go back to the first post-war decade. The Soviet Union emerged from World War II with the largest tank fleet in the world and very specific conclusions about what the next tank needed to be. The IS heavy tank series had performed well. In 1953, the T-10 entered service, the last direct descendant of that lineage. 57 tons, a 122mm gun, proven and dependable. But within 2 years, it was clear that a replacement was needed. In 1955, the Main Armored Directorate announced a competition. The requirements were unambiguous. Surpass the T-10 in protection and firepower, maintain mobility, and add the ability to operate in nuclear, chemical, and biological contamination. This wasn't just a new tank. It was a tank for a new kind of war, one where nuclear detonations would be routine background noise on the battlefield. 2 design bureaus took up the challenge, one in Leningrad, one in Chelyabinsk. From Leningrad came 3 competing proposals. 2 of them, Objects 277 and 278, were led by Joseph Kotin, the patriarch of Soviet heavy tank engineering. The third was Object 279. Its lead designer was Lev Sergeyevich Troyanov. Troyanov was no newcomer. He had worked on the IS-2, IS-3, and IS-4. He understood heavy tanks from the inside, and he understood their central problem. The heavier a machine, the worse it performs on soft ground. 60 tons on 2 tracks means enormous ground pressure. In autumn mud or swampy terrain, a tank like that simply sinks. Troyanov's solution was something no production tank had seriously attempted before: 4 tracks instead of 2. 2 pairs mounted on longitudinal hollow beams running beneath the hull, beams that doubled as fuel tanks. The contact area with the ground increased dramatically. Ground pressure dropped to just 0.6 kilograms per square centimeter, roughly comparable to a light tank. A 60-ton monster could travel terrain that would stop a conventional medium tank in its tracks. But mobility was only half of the problem. The other half was surviving a nuclear strike. Soviet engineers had done the calculations and arrived at an uncomfortable conclusion. The blast wave from a nuclear detonation easily flips a conventional tank onto its side. A tall silhouette, flat hull sides, these act like a sail. The vehicle loses stability and rolls over. To prevent this, Object 279 was given a hull shape that can only be described as science fiction: an elongated ellipsoid, streamlined on all sides. Thin, curved steel skirts enclosed the hull from the front and along the sides, bringing the overall profile to something almost aerodynamic. A blast wave was meant to slide around the hull rather than catch it. Those same skirts served a second purpose: protection against shaped charge warheads. They would detonate incoming heat rounds at a distance, dissipating the jet before it reached the main armor. And the main armor was something else entirely. The frontal plate, 192 millimeters thick, was angled at 60 degrees from vertical, with an additional twist of up to 45 degrees. That geometry translated to an equivalent protection of roughly 550 millimeters of rolled homogeneous steel. The turret reached up to 319 millimeters. At the time, this was an absolute world record among both production and experimental armored vehicles. There was virtually nothing in NATO's inventory capable of penetrating it. The first prototype was handed over in October 1959. The second began its test run on December 24th of the same year. In 1960, both vehicles were driven out for government demonstrations, first to Kubinka, then to Kapustin Yar. That second trip would decide everything. But before that, what was this machine actually like on the inside?
When you see Object 279 in person, at the Kubinka Museum outside Moscow, where it stands today, the first reaction is disorientation. It doesn't look like a tank. Too rounded, too low, too alien. Height, 2 meters 63 centimeters. For a 60-ton machine, that's remarkable. Width, 3 meters 40. Hull length, just under 7 meters. Over 11 with the gun extended forward. Crew of 4. Commander, gunner, loader, and driver. Classic layout. Engine at the rear, fighting compartment in the middle, driver's station at the front. The internal armored volume came to just 11.47 cubic meters. That was the smallest figure among all heavy tanks of the era. Less internal volume means a smaller target profile and less space for a penetrating round to do damage. The main gun was a 130mm M65 rifled cannon, barrel length 60 calibers. This was the most powerful gun the Soviets had ever mounted on a tracked vehicle. For comparison, the American M103 and the British Conqueror, its direct rivals by weight class, both carried 120mm weapons. Object 279 outgunned them both. The ammunition was separate loading. Projectile and propellant charge fed independently. A semi-automatic loading system provided a rate of fire of 5 to 7 rounds per minute. Ammunition stowage was 24 rounds, though some sources suggest the figure could reach 40 with a redesigned fighting compartment. The fire control system included a stereoscopic rangefinder, an automatic laying system, and the L2 night sight with an active infrared searchlight. The gun was stabilized in both axes by the Groza system. The tank could fire accurately on the move. Secondary armament, a 14.5mm KPVT heavy machine gun, coaxially mounted, 800 rounds.
The power plant was a single 2DG8M diesel, a 16-cylinder horizontally opposed engine producing 1,000 horsepower. At a combat weight of 60 tons, that gave a power-to-weight ratio of roughly 16.7 horsepower per ton, a respectable figure for a heavy vehicle of the period. Maximum road speed, 55 kilometers per hour. Operational range, 300 kilometers on a single fill. Now back to the running gear, the design decision that made Object 279 unlike anything before or since. 4 tracks arranged in pairs on 2 longitudinal hollow beams. The beams ran beneath the hull floor and doubled as fuel tanks. The suspension was hydropneumatic, with a torque converter and 3-speed planetary gearbox. The track tensioner was worm type. The track ran along nearly the entire length of the hull underside, creating an enormous contact patch with the ground. The results during trials were striking. Object 279 crossed snow-covered open ground, boggy terrain, felled trees, and anti-tank obstacles, terrain that stopped any contemporary Soviet tank cold. Ground pressure of 0.6 kilograms per square centimeter was nearly half that of the T-54 medium tank, roughly equivalent to a person standing in winter boots. The NBC protection system maintained slight overpressure inside the fighting compartment, preventing radioactive particles, chemical agents, and biological contaminants from entering. Automatic fire suppression, smoke-laying equipment, and a compartment heating and cooling system completed the package. By late 1950s standards, this crew protection was genuinely advanced. Step back and take stock of what had been built. A 60-ton vehicle with armor impenetrable to virtually all NATO weapons of the period. A gun that outranged and outclassed its Western counterparts.
Cross-country mobility matching a light tank. Nuclear battlefield survivability designed in from the ground up. Night fighting capability. On-the-move firing. This was not simply a heavy tank. It was a combat vehicle engineered for a war that began after the bombs had already fallen. It had one flaw. Actually, several. Testing revealed that 4 tracks, for all their advantages, created a serious problem with steering. Turning resistance was 12 times higher than on a conventional 2-track vehicle. The tank turned reluctantly, fighting itself. On soft or waterlogged ground, transmission efficiency dropped sharply. The tracks worked against each other, and the engine burned power fighting its own drivetrain. Maintenance was a nightmare. Reaching internal components required specialized equipment, and field repairs were essentially impossible. The gun barrel protruded nearly 3.5 meters ahead of the hull. On rough terrain, there was a real risk of it digging into the ground. The engineers knew these were engineering problems, not fundamental dead ends. A second and third prototype were already being prepared with revised designs. There was time to fix it. There was willingness to fix it. Both ran out on the same afternoon. July 22, 1960. Kapustin Yar Proving Ground. A demonstration of new Soviet military hardware. Nikita Khrushchev was in attendance. The first secretary of the Communist Party had never hidden his skepticism toward heavy tanks. He believed the future of warfare lay with missiles. Guided anti-tank missiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. These were the weapons that would decide the next conflict. Armored giants on tracks struck him as relics, expensive, slow to produce, and irrelevant in the face of nuclear weapons. Why build a 60-ton tank when a single tactical nuclear warhead could eliminate an entire armored column? At that demonstration, Khrushchev delivered his verdict. He categorically banned the adoption of any tracked vehicle exceeding 37 metric tons. Not 37 tons plus applique armor, 37 tons as an absolute ceiling. With that single declaration, the entire Soviet heavy tank program was finished. Not just Object 279, everything. Objects 277, 278, 770, all of it went into the archives. From January 1961, work was officially terminated. It's worth noting that Khrushchev's weight limit wasn't driven purely by doctrine. Soviet military planners also had a practical concern rooted in bitter experience. Bridges. In a defensive scenario, an enemy advancing deep into Soviet territory, a 60-ton tank couldn't cross most standard Soviet bridges. The Second World War had provided painful lessons about heavy vehicles and river crossings. Staff officers remembered them clearly. There was a third factor: cost. Object 279 was extraordinarily expensive.
The complex running gear, the large multi-piece cast hull, the unique suspension system, all of it demanded time, skilled labor, and scarce resources.
The money spent on one Object 279 could fund several medium tanks. And medium tanks, as the T-64 would soon demonstrate, were catching up fast in armor and firepower. The age of the dedicated heavy tank was ending regardless. Khrushchev simply closed the door before it could swing shut on its own. So the apocalypse tank died not on a battlefield, but at a conference. Of the 3 prototypes built, history preserved one. The second factory example, the vehicle that had driven to government demonstrations at Kubinka and Kapustin Yar, ended up at the Central Museum of Armored Forces in Kubinka. For decades, it sat outside, rusting, losing components. At some point, it became the museum's unofficial mascot, the exhibit that no visitor walks past without stopping. Too strange, too impressive, too unlike anything else ever built. In 2022, Object 279 came back to life. Restorers returned it to running condition. Footage filmed on the museum grounds shows it moving under its own power. Slowly, trailing diesel smoke, turret traversed to the rear. A machine frozen for 60 years, rolling again. What did this project actually leave behind? More than its fate suggests. The hydropneumatic suspension trialed on Object 279 fed directly into subsequent Soviet development work. The concept of minimizing internal armored volume, reducing the target the crew occupies, carried forward into the T-64 and T-72. The ellipsoidal hull with spaced skirts anticipated the logic that would eventually produce bolt-on explosive reactive armor 2 decades later. Object 279 was a machine that thought ahead of its time. There's a bitter irony worth sitting with. Object 279's competitors in the same competition, Objects 277 and 770, were technically more mature and more practical. Specialists of the period considered one of them the likely winner, had the program been allowed to continue. Had Kapustin Yar gone differently, the Soviet army might have fielded a heavy tank, capable of defeating any NATO armor through the 1970s. That didn't happen. Instead, Object 279 became what it is today, an unanswered question. Could the running gear problems have been solved? Was it a genuine dead end, or a road that simply wasn't allowed to reach its destination? Would it have changed anything? No one can say. What's certain is that it exists. One machine, in one museum, in working order. A flying saucer made of steel, built for a war that never came. The apocalypse tank, which outlasted its own apocalypse. If you enjoyed this, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What other forgotten or absurd military hardware should we cover next? See you in the next one.